Hi there, this is Danielle from Rough Drafts. If you like our content, please consider giving us a follow. You can listen and watch on Spotify and YouTube. You can listen on Apple. And over on our Patreon, you can see full content, videos, case studies, and much, much more. Go on, click the button to follow along. There are very few experiences in contemporary design and art that make you forget where you are. In this episode, I speak with Pauric Freeman, whose performances are one of them. He performs live audiovisual shows in venues where the audience watches someone make the work in real time. In the episode, we explore his process and its slowness, and that as a value, not a problem. He returns to this repeatedly and without apology, speaking about programming a component that might take days and might not work, but he doesn't frame this as a struggle. He frames it as how good work is actually made. There's a quiet confidence in that, almost a refusal of the pressure to produce quickly. He believes what happens between a piece of work and an audience in the room and in the body and in the brain fusing of sound and image is real, meaningful and irreplaceable. He says this in a language of psychoacoustics and cross-modal integration, but underneath the technical vocabulary is someone who genuinely believes that being fully present inside an experience is one of the most worthwhile things a human being can do, and that it's worth spending years learning how to make that possible for other people. Pauric Freeman is someone who moves slowly, thinks carefully, trusts the process and believes, without making a fuss about it, that the unrushed, human-made, fully immersive experience is something worth protecting.
Today's guest got into art through music and into technology through curiosity. Pauric Freeman is a Dublin-based creative developer and media artist who works at the intersection of sound, image and human perception, building systems that generate visuals in real time from the data his synthesizers produce, and then performing live inside those systems, navigating through audiovisual spaces he designed himself. It sounds so easy. He grew up in rural Ireland and started collecting records at 13, moving into DJing and then synthesis and then a master's that took him into abstract animation, psychoacoustics, we'll have to find out what that is, and the psychology of audiovisual experience. He then moved to New York, then on to Melbourne, where he was working in the National Gallery of Victoria and eventually teaching interactive media to fine art animation students. He luckily then for us, he came back to Dublin and was freelancing as a creative developer, building interactive installations, AR, VR experiences, mobile applications, while continuing to perform and make work as well. In 2021, he performed at the Light Moves Festival in Limerick, supporting Beatrice Dillon. He also made River Poem, a collaboration with Dr. Janine Nagy that retrained GPT-2 on Finnegan's Wake and generated new Joycean prose and projection mapped it live onto a three-dimensional model of Dublin City along the River Liffey. Then he also worked on Arts Council funded project structures in 2024, and we'll speak a little bit about that later. He even made time to stop at Bounce 2025, the first Bounce, and mesmerised the audience in Trinity College with his performance that closed the show. What I want to talk to Pauric today is about what he describes as the core of his practice, designing an audiovisual space and then navigating through it, the gap between designing a system and performing inside it, how he makes decisions when the outcome is never fixed, and what it takes to work seriously in a field that sits somewhere between music, visual art, code and cognitive science, and doesn't quite belong in any of them. Pauric, welcome to Rough Drafts.
Thanks, Danielle.
So can you start off maybe the start of your journey? Like, how did you get into design and creativity?
It was probably so like you mentioned, I was playing records from when I was young, so I was always interested in music. And when I think when I finished high school, then I was going into college, and I did my degree was in communications and creative media. And that was where I was introduced to a couple of other fields, like outside of music. So we were working a little bit with some visual design, some interactive design, which was probably one of the more interesting areas that I kind of took on at that point. And then there was a little bit of music as well within that, or sound production. And then everything else that goes along with kind of media studies, theory, and sociology. And that's kind of where I got introduced to a lot of other fields that probably fed into the work that I'm doing now.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
And so, just to ask, I'm always interested to know. So you started collecting records at 13. What was your first record? Is this something really credible?
No. Oh, no. Well, there was. I remember we got 6 records, and it was myself and my brother, my older brother, and we bought them from HMV
Mhm.
Records, I think, which was in Grafton Street. So obviously we had to travel up from Monaghan to go to the record store, and we bought 6 records. I can't remember them all, but there was I think there was 2 Mauro Picotto records in there, and that's kind of the only ones I remember from it. I still
Funny that, isn't it? I don't remember any of the rest of them. But your early love of music, then, do you think that really kind of brought you into the kind of career that you have now?
Yeah, I
Mm.
I think so. I guess like where I grew up, there's not like a huge, at least in that time anyway, there wasn't like a lot of other art around to see.
Mm.
So I didn't come from a family of artists or anything like that. My parents didn't work in those fields, or nor anyone else in like aunties or uncles or anything like that. So it was kind of something that I wasn't really exposed to, and I think it was I got exposed to music, to electronic music quite young. So I just became interested in that, and then it wasn't until I went to college that I kind of realized that there's all these other disciplines that are
Mm.
interesting, and that actually suits the way that I think, or what I'm interested in.
Mm. And then growing up in Monaghan, and you're saying like there wasn't a huge amount of access to kind of art. Like, what were you interested in as you were growing up?
Music. I was
Music.
like, it was just purely music. I mean, when I was younger, there was, other things like Lego and different things when I was a child. But when I kind of hit or became a teenager, then it was music, and I was pretty obsessed with it, I think, at that point. And yeah, I started DJing, and then started producing music, or trying to produce music, or trying to find out. It was kind of different back then because um like, it was, the access to information was different. So you had to, like, the internet wasn't really there as it is now today, where there's it's so easy to access information or learn how to do things.
Mm.
But it was mostly based around buying magazines. So you'd have
Yeah.
to buy a magazine, and then the magazine would have information about how to do a certain thing. And those magazines weren't really available in Monaghan, so you had to wait until you were in Dublin or something like that, and then you pick up a magazine, and then you'd read about perhaps some software for making music, and then you'd try that out. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was kind of how it went.
Yeah, and then I read in an article that you started then kind of getting into interaction design and programming with Flash. So it brings back memories of the old Flash, the heydays of Quark Express and Director and all of these kind
Yeah,
of things. And like that, the magazine, like, Creative Review would have information on the new software, like, and I wasn't exposed to that until I went to college too and saw, oh, actually, this is a thing. Like, um, but yeah, so what kind of things were you kind of tinkering around with when you started to get into kind of different software?
yeah. So like a couple of the modules that we were learning that we were doing in college, there was one that was, I think it was called interactive authoring, which was the kind of the way that it was framed in academia, I guess, back then. And we were introduced to Lingo, director and Lingo. That was the first one, and then to Flash and ActionScript. Then afterwards, and actually, when I was preparing for the podcast, I actually found all the old Flash games and things that we had to produce. So it was kind of
Oh, we need
interesting.
to see them.
Yeah, yeah. I'll try and find some screenshots and stuff. So that was the first time, and that was the first time I'd been introduced to programming.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know much about it, or I didn't think much about it up until that point. But I just really loved it, particularly the action script programming, because it felt um, robust, and there was a lot to explore within it. So that's probably the first time that I got really, really hooked on some aspect of it, was programming Flash. And there was an assignment, and I remember like just being obsessed with doing that assignment, because it was just new, and it was a different way of working, and you could write this code and then these images moved, or you could make a game or whatever, and it was just completely new to me, I guess.
Yeah, Flash was a lot of fun, wasn't it? And was that the first kind of thing that you felt like, I've made this? It's not just I'm learning a piece of software, but I'm actually, I'm experimenting and I'm trying different things and it's producing strange outcomes, which I wasn't really aware were going to happen. Was that kind of when you were doing that particular assignment?
Yeah. There
Yeah.
was a lot of like it, just the fact that it went from text into something that was like had a graphical interface, and then you could interact with it. And there was a
Mm,
shooting game that I had where you had to shoot aliens, and like to get from text to that was just that was the thing that I was kind of most interested in. And then a lot of the kind of the logic behind it, and changing the logic, and how that would change the rules within the game and different things like that.
yeah.
To the point where I, like, by the end of when I graduated from my undergrad, I was like fully set on just being a Flash programmer. Like that's what I wanted to be my job. But within a year, like I think Flash had kind of been cut from or yeah, it was on a downward spiral at that point. So
Yeah.
I had to think of something else.
So then you moved on and from Flash and went into much more complex kind of software and then code and data and visual systems. It must have kind of felt like a kind of alchemy then when you were able to really start to control things and get into coding.
Yeah. So towards the end of the undergrad, the final projects that we worked on in our third and fourth year was installation. So that was, and so we did two different installations, and that was the point that became like you're starting to pull in loads of other software. So there was like both installations that I worked on at that time were sound and video based, and interactive as well. So you were kind of pulling together like the interests in music that I had, as well as some of the Flash programming and visual art and different things like that. So, and they're all kind of coming together, and you were making them talk to each other,
Wow.
which I guess is not really that much different than what I'm still doing now. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then you kind of, I suppose most of the work you do is kind of a touch designer now, and using Ableton and going between the two. Would that be right?
Yeah. It's still using other platforms as well. It just kind of depends on what the project is, really.
Mhm.
Like sometimes things like Max MSP or processing or other platforms come up. It's always a case that depending on what the project is, there's usually a way to approach it that best suits the project. And that's, I like to just kind of keep focused on that. It just so happens that like 95% of the stuff that I want to do, Touch Designer is really good at doing that. So I do tend to be working with that particular platform quite a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
from a interactive and video side. Yeah.
And then I suppose to talk about your process. So like, you're designing something in your studio in Dublin, and then, it's going to be experienced in another space, another place, a different country, perhaps. There's the distance between those 2 points. What does that look like? And can you walk us through like your process when you start a commission or start a job?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's always different, but it's always useful to try and think about what that space is and give context to what the final piece will be, because it's so different looking at it on a screen in the studio versus when it's in a space. First of all, it's going to be bigger for starters, so there's going to be a scale that's kind of unknown at that point. But then there's so many other factors that come into it, and sometimes, like for example, with the structures show, it's a show that you want to be able to perform multiple times in a lot of different spaces. So you're trying to make it in a way that it's suitable for lots of different, or it can be adjusted during the performance to suit different spaces as well. Like there's sometimes there's techniques to do, like I try and use previs to get an idea of what the scale will be. And I have like kind of small little previs systems that I can just put the video into, so I can get an idea of, okay, this is what it looks like on stage, this is what it looks like in scale. And it helps you to kind of strip things down to a level that's suitable, because obviously when everything is made a lot bigger, it has such a bigger impact. So when you're working, or I find that when I'm working on a smaller screen, I tend to pack more into it. And then whenever I get into the space and it's so much bigger, it feels like it's too much for that. So that's one example of where the previs can be handy to kind of get somewhat of an idea of that.
And like working at that scale, like how is it just experience, being able to like that kind of look at something that's packed in tight on a small screen and know that it's going to, it's going to be too much for the space, or, how do you grapple with that? Because it's all about scale, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely has a huge effect. I mean, I think it's probably similar to a lot of other disciplines as well, where it's kind of like the more you can kind of strip it down to its basics, the easier it will translate, and the easier it'll translate on both a large screen as well as say smaller spaces as well. So it's just a matter of, I usually develop the work or develop it to a certain point and then go, okay, what can I remove while keeping it keeping the idea still there. Yeah. That's just generally the approach I go for any of them.
Yeah. And like, how do you describe your work? So if you were trying, it's a beautiful sunny summer here in Dublin, and you're out at a barbecue and you bump into someone and you're trying to explain, what it is you do. What is your your party line?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really have one. It kind of jumps around. It also depends on who you're talking to. Like if I'm back in Monaghan and I'm talking to my auntie, it's a very different conversation than if I'm in Dublin and I'm chatting to someone from the arts. But I try and describe it as music composition that incorporates video as well. Yeah,
Okay.
something around that. Just so it's people can I guess understand what it is straight off the bat, and if they if they have any ideas of or if they're familiar with that area at all, they can ask more questions from there, I guess.
Yeah. And do the aunties understand what it is you're doing?
I won't like, it's difficult for them. Like even with my parents, I don't think they fully understand what it is that I do. Because they don't really see it, or there's no one else that they know that works in that. And so it's kind of difficult for them. They're really supportive, of course. But yeah, I think it's difficult for them to fully grasp yeah, what it is and why I'm so interested in it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is. I suppose it's tricky pursuit, and then it's tricky to explain it as well. And I think most people that are involved in a creative career do find it difficult to articulate to their closest relatives, what it is they actually do. And yeah, it can be tough. But your work is kind of it's visuals, it's animation, it's data, it's all of these different disciplines that in their own right, they have their own kind of references, they have their own histories, I guess. Where are you looking for inspiration for your work? Like, where are you finding that from?
Yeah. I think probably first and foremost music, because
Mhm.
just because that's, I guess, my initial interest and the area that I've studied more so, and that I'm more familiar with. So that's probably where most of it comes from.
Mhm.
But there are other areas like, I'm quite interested in graphic design, like contemporary graphic design, in particular. Like, there's a lot that I like about that, and there's elements of that I try and bring into the work. Like, I just think it's interesting to, um, I guess at the end of the day, if you're presenting something in video, like there's a narrative that needs to be there, and it's a communication with the audience.
Mhm.
And I just always have found it useful to think about visual communication, like, and how that discipline can feed into it, and because there's a whole study, like, that's an area that's been studied, it's been researched, it's been put into practice, and there's lots there. It's just a fruitful area to look into, because
Mhm.
I guess it hits on a lot of the points that I'm trying to work with. So that one's a pretty useful one. And through that, then kind of interested in typography. And then, yeah, I think that would be kind of the main ones. I don't necessarily have like although the work that I do is animation, I guess, in some way. I don't have a huge knowledge of animation, or of that. A little bit of the abstract animators from the 20th century, but outside of that, I don't really know much about that field, for example.
Yeah. So let's have a look at some of the clips. So let's talk about your process. Let's talk about how this came to be.
Yeah. So this project started. in January 2024. It was funded by the Arts Council, so there was a nice so I had 4 months to work on a project, which was really nice. And I think like there was lots of things before that that kind of had brought me to that point in terms of the setups that I was using and the approaches that I was using. And this was the first time where I was kind of sitting down with all the technical aspects of it kind of understood and developed. And then I was just sitting down to kind of compose, I guess. So just a bit more freedom in terms of just the design of the work itself.
Yeah. And then like you know, these kind of hyper digital environments that you're kind of creating within this, like, you know, what is it you're trying to kind of achieve within that?
Yeah. So I think at the core of what it is, it's really about music composition and using video as a way to extend the composition process. So using video to either expand upon it or remove information from it or change your understanding of what's been presented within the composition. But it's really about like, I guess that's my background is music composition and writing music mainly. So it's about doing that, but about using different mediums to tell that story.
I'm really interested in, like, you know, the process versus the technology, right? And it's kind of like, so, you know, do you have a clear idea of what it is you're trying to achieve? And then you know, using certain media, as you say, kind of changes what your output ends up being, and it's kind of nearly like an unintended, not unintended consequence, but an unintended output. But you know, like, how do you kind of navigate that? That it's, you know, there's a plan, obviously, but the plan changes quite probably fluidly.
Yeah. I guess there's a lot of things. Like before that point, I probably spent like 7 or 8 years like playing around with these ideas. And when I was doing that, I kind of realized that when you have sound or music and that's presented alongside video, it changes the experience for the user versus when that video was taken away. And like there's fields of study like the McGurk effect, for example, that kind of looks at that. It's not a very compositional way of thinking about it. It's just a phenomenon that's kind of part of being human. So that was kind of interesting, and then I spent like quite a few years basically just playing around with that and being like, oh, that's kind of interesting. This is interesting. What happens when this happens, or when you put these two things together? How does that change the experience of the music? Like, does it help the audience understand a section of music better, or does it help them to feel a bit more confused, or, you know, just trying to like play around with what it is that the audience would feel from that kind of experience. And alongside doing that, there's a lot of kind of technical parts that you kind of have to work on as well. So, you know, programming this little section so that it will do things in that way. And that can be very time consuming, the programming part. So there might be an idea, and then I might have to like segue or a sidestep for a week or two to develop this kind of component, and then come back to it. And then you're like, it might work or it might not work at the end. You know, it might get the desired effect or not. So there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of like back and forth, and it's a pretty slow process. And I think that was what kind of a lot of that was figured out when I was starting this project. So a lot of that I'd kind of spent a couple of years. I'd done a couple of shows at that point. Like I think there was there was probably 3 different shows that I'd kind of done up to that point before. So I had the understanding, and the tech was kind of produced up to a certain point. So not having to think about that and to understand what works and what doesn't work was really useful going into the project at that time.
And like, what's the feedback from the audience? You know, because ultimately they're the ones experiencing what you've put together.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a lot of different kind of reactions. I mean, it's a music piece at the end of the day. So there's elements of it that are quite intense, and that's just what I'm kind of drawn to in music. So that's that's always interesting because that's an experience that maybe some people might not have expected before they go in to see the show. So they're kind of almost confronted with that. So some people comment more on the music, some people comment on the video side of it. I think there's a lot of people that watch the show and they come from one world or another world, and they tend to focus a bit more on that naturally, let's say. But I would say that probably the most comments come from people who have a music background, because they can kind of understand a little bit about what the video is trying to do. Because really the video is kind of framed around music, like structures in music and arrangements within music.
Mm. And like, so, your work is obviously live and it's happening like in front of everyone. Like, what's the hardest kind of technical kind of, or even creative problem that you kind of have to, think on your feet mid-performance? Is there anything that you're like, that has kind of made you stumble or made you, kind of upset the kind of performance?
Yeah, I mean, there's always moments where you kind of forget to do something, or there's something that you wanted to do at a certain point and then you forgot about it, and then it's a bit too late, and you have to decide whether you go back and change that to be where you want to be, or you just kind of let it go and kind of go with it. Yeah, there is one thing that I've kind of designed within the system that helps me, at least, is that the video side of it, I can't see the video while I'm performing. So what I've done is the system's kind of programmed, the video system is programmed to respond to how I interact with the synthesizers. And then pretty much most of the gigs, the video is behind me, so I don't see it at all. So I'm not really using that as a way to, like, that's not informing how I perform. So I'm just able to perform on the music side of things. And I think that just helps, because it stops me thinking too much about the video. And if you're watching it and then you're trying to make changes or anything like that, I don't feel like that would be nice, a nice position to be in when on stage in front of an audience.
That way, I suppose it really is unique. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like completely unique. You're not aware it's kind of happening behind you. And like with structures, I think you've said that that's kind of, it's a work in progress. And it's something that's never finished. Like with that performance, how do you know when it's at a point where, okay, I can show an audience now? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, at the end of the 4 months, I had a perform of the initial 4 month kind of phase of producing it. That was at the end of that, I had a show. So that was kind of, okay, it has to be in somewhat of a finished state to present it. And then each time I performed it after that, I'd usually do some changes to some elements that I was maybe not happy with. I'm like, okay, I can, fix up this part or fix up that part. And then in addition to that, just writing entire new sections for it as well. And that's just really a case that, like, I've been performing it now for 2 years. So there's going to be a point where there's a bit of an overlap in terms of audience, someone who's seen it before. And I like to be able to keep it fresh, and keep it interesting in a way that people can come back and see it again. So just writing new sections for it. And that's just really a case of like, exploring some of the ideas that I didn't have time to do in the past, or maybe a new idea has come up, and composing that.
okay. I think we have another video. We're going to take another look at another piece of the performance. And then maybe you could talk to us a little bit about Equilibrium, and that was a collaboration, isn't that right?
Yeah, Equilibrium was that was a collaboration with a Dutch artist, Sebastian Smink, who's a good friend, and we'd been that actually started out as a different project called Phase, and we never really were able to finish that one. But he came over to Ireland here to develop that Phase piece, and what we ended up with was a piece that was entirely different, and ended up being Equilibrium. So we had one phase of developing it here in Ireland over a couple of days, and then the final part of it was developed in Amsterdam at the Maca Institute. So we were in there which was a really amazing space. It's a huge. A lot of their focus is on like cinema. So they had this huge, I think it was like 8 meter wide projection screen in the space, and they just were like, yeah, go for it, use it for a couple of days, and we could kind of do whatever we want. So we got some lasers, we got a sound system in, and we kind of played around with the ideas that we developed in Ireland, and yeah, the installation kind of grew out of that. And then we had a small opening on the Sunday, so if you could come visit.
Let's take a look at a clip.
That one was, I suppose, on display in Amsterdam, and then you've done lots of work in Ireland. Is there a difference to what you produce based on, different countries, cultural climates, and things like that? Is that something that you consider as part of your work?
Um, not not really. I tend to try and produce any of the work in a way that is suitable for any space, because it's kind of hard to know, like when you have a situation in Ireland, like Ireland's a smaller country, it doesn't have as many spaces as, like, these other cities like Berlin or Amsterdam or places like that. It's very hard to compete with the scale that they have, and the the access to space. So always when kind of composing the work, it's useful to kind of think about it being possible to be presented in any country. I think that's, or at least that's the way I approach it, because um, a lot of the times the places where it is presented is going to be overseas.
Coming back to Ireland, then you did the festival in Limerick, Light Moves, and that was audio visual projection as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, so that was actually the first audiovisual performance that I've done. So
Oh,
that
okay.
was um, it was that was the first kind of point after maybe like 8 years or so of playing around with different audiovisual composition approaches. Um, I was kind of documenting the work, and it was starting to come together to be somewhat of a show at that point. And I got the opportunity to perform, so that was kind of a deadline that forced me to kind of put everything together. It was a much more, from a technical perspective, it was a much more simplified version. It was just using a modular synthesizer and video.
Mhm.
So it was a lot more streamlined, and in many ways it was actually easier to kind of work with it, because it was so stripped down in terms of the available tech. So that was uh yeah, and like that was a good kind of learning point for composing. And I think since then I kind of went another direction and started incorporating a lot of other technologies, particularly like sound technologies. And then uh, once I'd done that, I realized that that first kind of show in Limerick was actually a nice way of working, because of the simplicity of the system. So it just forces you to work with what you've got, rather than having too many choices. Yeah.
And that kind of reductive nature of the work and having less to play with and having more parameters sometimes can produce better work rather than throwing, the kitchen sink at something. Do you agree with
Yeah,
that?
yeah, absolutely. Like, and
Mm,
I think it's the same in any practice. Like,
mm,
it brings a continuity to the work,
mm,
and it just helps everything to work together a little bit more. And I think from an audience perspective, it's like their their brains is not like jumping around too much from too many different
mm,
ideas. And I've always felt that, like, for audiovisual performance, there's a lot for the audience already. Like, there's already sound and video kind of presented at the same time. There's a lot to kind of take in,
mhm,
particularly within the context of, like, you're in a music performance environment. So normally it's just music, and then you've got this
mhm,
added element on top. So it's like, there's a lot to take in. So I think kind of simplifying it down
mhm.
can help things communicate a wee bit better.
And just from my own experience, I saw you at Bounce. The audience was completely still. I don't think people took a breath. So they were just captivated. But when it's placed in these kind of more entertainment style settings, like kind of club kind of venue type of places, is there like a hush of silence, or like what is the feeling like in the room?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because they're all really different.
Mm,
Depends on, like, I think it's just like, there's an expectation that people have before they go into a space. Like, if it's in a venue that's standing, like, people are expecting to move a little bit more, and maybe
mm,
dance a little bit, or
mm,
yeah. Whereas if you go into, most of my shows are actually seated, so like the bounce one, for example, that was seated. So I think that's people have a certain expectation whenever they go into that space. You have a different way of interacting with the work when it's like that. So first of all, you're going to stay for the entire length of it.
mhm,
You're not going to get up and leave at any point. Whereas when you're in a venue where you're standing, you're more comfortable to leave and go to the bathroom, or leave to go somewhere else. So it creates a total different audience from that perspective. And yeah, and it can definitely, and I try to change the live show based on that.
mm.
Yeah, just making it more suitable for a seated audience or a standing audience. And yeah, I think that's kind of useful
Mm.
in performance.
Yeah, and it's it's that thing of like, you'd go to certain bands, and you just hear people talking, and you nearly can't hear the band, and you just wonder, like, why people have come to a certain event if it wasn't to experience the music. But like, if it's a seated thing, I think you're going to experience it in a completely different way, as you say, than if you're standing up, maybe people beside you chatting, and it's a lot more, energetic in the audience. I suppose you're going to have a completely different feeling and experience of the work itself, and then come away thinking maybe totally differently about the moments that you've put in there and what you were hoping to achieve, based on those simple, the physicality of how you're experiencing the work.
Yeah, definitely. And like I think particularly for seated, and this is kind of why I prefer seated environments, is that like the work can be a little bit more delicate, or you can go into a lot more subtle detail within a seated venue, because people just seem to have a bit more focus, or they're a bit more engaged with it. So you're able to go into those moments, and people will appreciate it. Whereas if you try to do that in like a festival setting, or in a space where people are standing and there is that movement of people, then that can sometimes not translate as well.
Mm. And
Yeah.
is this kind of what you mean by psychoacoustics? Is that term? Is that what that means about the experience?
Yeah, well, psychoacoustics is the field of study that kind of covers acoustics and the physiology of the body, and it's a couple of different areas kind of working together to understand how we experience sound.
Mm.
So there's obviously the physiology of the ear, like how the ear filters and shapes the sound as it enters into our ear canals, and how we localize sound, so how we find out where it's coming from and different things like that. But then also it's looking at the kind of cognitive science aspect of it, like how, like, when the sound enters um into our brains, like what kind of happens at that point, and how do we understand the experience, and like, and also the acoustics of a room. So the that field kind of covers that as well. So it's quite a broad field, but a lot of the kind of interesting parts that I find is that point whenever it kind of enters into the body, and we're trying to understand it, and our brain is trying to make sense of the information. Um, when when music is presented, and this works for all our senses really, but when it's presented with other information, like perhaps visual information, well, our brain actually merges the two together. So it doesn't treat them separately and think, okay, well, here's a video and here's sound. It actually kind of merges them together in a process called cross-modal integration. So it's integrating the multiple senses. So then you get a different experience again from that. Like a lot of these things are kind of primal things that we had when we were, let's say, hunter-gatherers, that were useful. So like how we localize sound, and how we merged a visual movement of something with a sound that we hear. So that was obviously useful if you were hunting and there was some danger around. So there's a lot of these things that kind of tie back to that, but it's kind of built into our brains, and it's still an area that, of course, is very there's a lot still to understand about it, but it's certainly quite interesting in terms of what we know.
And while you might say there's gaps in your knowledge of graphic design, and I think, as you said, graphic design is a great base, because even if you went from graphic design into motion, a good motion designer is a great graphic designer. There's knowing the certain kind of, the first principles, really can apply to any design, and the visuals that you produce are stunning within their own right, without even the sound. And I find that that's what instinctively kind of drew me to your work, because I just thought, wow, these visuals are stunning, but also there's this, sensorial thing happening where I'm experiencing this music too, and it's almost like sensory overload, full immersion, sensory overload, and forget where you are for a moment, while you're just kind of just really deep in the experience, which is something that, you know, doesn't happen through a lot of media now, we're very distractible as
Yeah.
people, but it really, there's this immersion to your work. So I can see it's uh, different audience members might kind of talk about it from the sound point of view, from the music point of view, the visual, but it is such an immersive thing. It's almost hard to conceive how it actually appears on stage. It's just it's for me it's such a treat to see. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, no, it's wonderful, and I imagine,
I see you.
probably making the work and the coding and that is, it's quite detailed. But in my head, if I was to think of you working, I think you're working in a kind of a flow state. You're just deeply involved. Would that be anyway true? Do you get to that kind of flow state?
Yeah, like sometimes, yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
There's a lot of times when it's like it's really, really slow process. That's
Mm.
the only thing, and I think that's what kind of keeps a lot of people away from it, or at least that's what I think does anyway. So it's like you could be trying to do a certain idea or work on a certain aspect of it, and it might end up, um, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, you could end up like 2 or 3 days or spending quite a while like programming something which isn't
Mm.
necessarily, or at least I don't fully consider it a flow state,
Mm.
because you're kind of removed from both the sonic element and the visual element.
Mm.
So it can be tricky. But then what I try and do is I try and build it in a way that it's performative, so that I can uh, do all the kind of technical side and program it up, and then whenever it's ready to go, then I can kind of play with it and program or perform on it, so that you can extract different things during the performance. So I guess that's maybe a little bit more of a flow state. Yeah.
Mm. And because this podcast is called Rough Drafts, the last question I tend to ask is about something that's unresolved or unfinished. So, is there anything that you have maybe, in your mind that you haven't explored yet, you want to kind of dig deeper into, you want to spend a bit of time with, or anything that you really want to challenge yourself with in the next while?
Yeah. From yeah, there is a couple of projects that I'm working on at the moment. There's an installation that I'm working on that's actually quite a bit different than the work that I do for the performance. So that's kind of taken a completely different um approach to things, and that's working with spatialization a bit more. So working with the space of an environment, which is kind of it's a little bit difficult to do it in performance, because mainly because when putting a performance together, you want to make it suitable for multiple venues. So you kind of have to, or yeah, strip it back down to something that's easy to reproduce in another venue or in another space. So having something that's complicated and spatial and works within an environment can be tricky.
Mm.
So trying to work with that for installation at the moment, so that I can kind of um yeah, just explore some of the ideas that I'm not really able to do within performance. So that's probably one of them. And I think the other one then is incorporating um the voice, like incorporating voice within the work. So like it's at the moment, obviously it's my show is electronic. There's no voice part of it. And there's a couple of kind of technical things that make it tricky to work with voice. So just trying to figure out what how to kind of overcome those obstacles, and then once I've kind of overcome those obstacles, how to compose best with that.
Okay, interesting. And would this be live voice, or
I
recorded,
would
or
I would
yeah,
like to be I would
yeah.
like it to be live voice. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Mm.
this is that's the voice is not something I've started working on yet,
Mm.
but I think it would be nice. That's something that's been on my mind for a while. And I think that it would be, yeah, I think it would bring another perspective to the work,
Mhm.
and another um possibility for storytelling, I guess, which is
Yeah.
kind of what it all kind of boils down to.
So stay tuned and check out your website and socials and all that kind of stuff. Um, Great. Well, listen, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. We're going to leave it there unless there's anything else you'd like to mention.
No, I think that's great. Thanks very much for inviting me on. It's been
Oh,
really
it's been
great.
a pleasure. Thank you so much, Pauric.
Thanks, Danielle.
If you liked that episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can also watch the videos over on Spotify and YouTube, and go to our Patreon channel to see more podcasts, live content and case studies. Just search Bounce Creative.